This is MP Woodward, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
We did this show for, I think it was your book, Dead Drop.
Yeah.
Back then, and we talked about our intelligence world and our intelligence chops, and it's always interesting as the further I get away from actually doing the job, the more I seem to know about it. Do you find? I mean, look, you write about stuff in this world, but do you find like that perspective really informs like who you would be if you had to do that job again?
That's an interesting question. I think it's partially a function of age and wisdom, to be perfectly honest, and just a different perspective on life. I think in my own case, that's something I did between the ages of 20 and 30 or 22 and 32.
Right.
And
right.
And I went on after that to have a career in the technology field that took me all around the world and let me see, I think, cultures and people up close and in a different way, and see large organizations function in a different way. So I do think that that there's things I would do perhaps differently, or look at least differently. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know for sure that's true for me. And the cultural thing is big. And sometimes the military gets so locked in on what it thinks it needs to know that it misses. I always say, like, we're always taught to go look for a needle in a field of haystacks. And I'm like, let's just go to the next field over where it's just all needles. Mm-hmm. And just scoop up all this information that helps a commander do his job better. And that's uncomfortable because that means you have to look for things that aren't just threat. But we love to focus on, and we're going to get to your book here in a second. By the way, here it is, everybody. It's awesome. It's called Shadow State. It's a Tom Clancy novel written by MP Woodward on the Jack Ryan Jr. Part of the world. But that focus, it's always threat. It often, I found, forced us to miss things that were right in front of our face that were harming our mission. That if we looked in front of the threat, before the threat, left of the threat, there was a lot of work to do there.
Yeah. Well, I also think the information management part of it within an organization, and ultimately you're gathering that intelligence to be useful in making a decision or a series of decisions. And so getting that to the right people at the right time in a consumable way, in the right tools, is a challenge. And that's not a challenge that's unique to the military. That's pretty much any competitive organization. It just happens to be a little more dangerous or perhaps life-threatening in the military. But I think that as you mentioned, moving on into the business world after that, and seeing that is always a challenge. Frankly, I thought my intelligence background helped me in the business world, and I think that if I were to go back to it, the business world would help me with intelligence.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So you have your own writing that you do in your own books, right? And it's already such a big monumental task to get over the top where you're like, hey, I can actually make money writing novels, right?
Yeah.
And then you hit this gear, boom, when the Clancy people are like, hey, MP, what do you think? And that just got to blow you away, man. Like, look, we're basically the same exact age. And so, we read Red Storm Rising. We read Hunt for Red October. It had to have blown your mind.
Yeah, still kind of blows my mind. And, since we're the same age, I think I was a midshipman in training reading Hunt for Red October and thinking, oh, this is so exciting. It's so inspirational. By the way, Top Gun came out about that same time. And so it was all there was kind of this glamour to it. But I thought that what the Tom Clancy series did for the first time was really popularize the techno thriller within the military realm. Back then, if you'll recall, I think Michael Crichton was a really popular novelist, right, with Jurassic Park, for example. And he really planted the flag on, let's take something scientific and then make that be the germ of a story, and then we'll dramatize that and make it really cool and educate readers along the way. I think of Tom Clancy as doing something similar, but parting the curtains on a world that few of us knew anything about at the time. Like, well, what does the military do? Like, how does this function? How do they make decisions at the highest level of government, and then make that super authentic by bringing in the technologies to support it. And so when I got this gig, I went back and I reread a couple of them, and I was like, wow, they're so technical. It's really interesting. Like Cardinal of the Kremlin, I realize now, and that was the third Jack Ryan book. I realize now that was basically Star Wars, right? And Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, and it was explaining satellite technology and lasers and all these things. And I thought, man, pretty wild that he geeked out on all this stuff in whatever that was, 1988 or something, when there was no internet or anything like that to make it easy. So yeah, I'm super honored to be part of this and to see this ugly mug on the back flap with Tom Clancy is it's a thrill.
It is a thrill, and I laughed when you said Star Wars because you recall at the time it was like this ridiculous, especially like Reagan's political adversary. So like, lasers and space, and it was all like a big thing. Yeah. Meanwhile, it's like one of the things that kind of like makes Russia go, I don't know what we're going to do, man. We look at their submarines.
And what's amazing is how, and now there's a space force, right? And
right.
What's back to your question about intelligence? I think one of the things that's shocking is how much open source intelligence there is now, right? But back in our days, imagery intelligence came from satellites. Nobody knew it. And it was like, oh, look at this. This is a Nears level 4 photograph. And now, you can go on Google Earth and look at this stuff. So when I not long ago in researching another book, I watched this video. I think it was through the Wall Street Journal, and it was a Space Force guy giving a tour of NORAD and showing how this global nest of satellites detects everything and basically zaps it, and then integrates with things like Patriots, et cetera, for missile defense. And I was thinking, that was a vision. It's not crazy, and the technology is very doable.
Yeah. And the Space Force thing again was like comical, and it's like, no, you guys don't understand that space is competitive, and I know I used to do a lot of work with the company. It was handyman work, but work with the folks over at Spire, and they were one of the first micro satellite companies, and NOAA's like NOAA, the national whatever, the weather people. And they're like, we would never need any of your technology. And then they saw it and they're like, how do we sign up? Right. So the business of space is continuing to explode. And if you have go ahead.
If you think of everything, all these weapon systems, right? You can pick up anything. You go, oh, we're in a race with China now for AI drones. Okay. Well, those AI drones are going to have to know where they are in the world. They're going to need data communication to send back and forth. All of that's going to be via satellite. So the next Pearl Harbor, the very first attack is going to be on a satellite network. I don't see how else that can be. If you want to cripple a great power military, that you have to, the first thing to do is to take out its information flow. That flow is going to be via satellite.
Yeah. And then you have like the Lagrange points, and this is just getting super techy and spacey, but these Lagrange points for everybody are kind of like eddies in space where there's gravity, and you can put something out there. I like to think of like a Flying J truck stop where you can buy some Burl clocks and take a shower or whatever. But if you're the country that puts things there, you're the country that has put things there, and so someone has to deal with that, right? And that involves their budget. And so all of these things are hyper competitive, and they all fall within that world of Space Force and intelligence and operations. And even though we're not supposed to play war games in space, here we are,
Yeah. I think that's not realistic because it's just going to happen. It's like saying we're not going to, go to war on the oceans. I know like the Air Mobility Command, that part of the Air Force that moves things around the world. And I'm not revealing anything. I have no classified knowledge here, but I know that they've looked in the past because I saw it in a documentary about pre-positioning supplies in space and then push them down. They're like, well, we can fly a C-17, which would take X amount of time and be at a threat, or it could just kind of drop out of the heavens. And you hear this at first, you go, well, that's nuts. And then you give it, then you kind of say, well, maybe so.
Is it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I'm glad you talked about the whole thing. Like, it's nice to think that we're not going to be competitive in space. Competitive includes war. It doesn't have to, things below that are still, you're still doing things that your adversary doesn't want you to do. And so
Yeah.
we are saying, hey, this is a playground. We're going to go up there and we're going to play on it, and we're going to play hard.
Well, that's, getting back to the book, that is, I wanted to choose a story that highlighted that, what we're talking about, which is really great power competition. And I think most of us understand at this point, here in 2024, that, hey, from about, the late 90s, we went good news, or the late 80s, good news, we won the Cold War. And then in the 2000s, that turned into, well, now we have this problem with global extremism and terrorism. And then, oh, wait a minute, while we were, developing our military for that, turns out that we may have taken our eye off the ball in the next sine wave of great power competition. And here we are.
Yeah, and then I guess this would get back to Pete talking about his Lagrange points, flying J truck stops. You want to create your own portion of the sine wave. Like, hey, you'll have to deal with this because we have this advantage now. And until you do something, like you're going to have to get that far out into space and be competitive out there. And so all of this is just like this ball of cats all fighting each other, and trying to just like pick which one you want to win. And you just really can't know.
Yeah. And let's hope that strategic thinkers and military planners are looking at all those advanced tools and being creative about it. That is the way of technology. And I think the partnerships with private industry are probably more important than ever, because much of this is pretty much all of it is evolving in private industry.
We see that in Israel for sure. Their ability to innovate, like person for person in their nation. There's no better country at that.
Well, I also look at, there was a time when low Earth orbit satellites were the province of, the intelligence agencies. And there was a dream with Iridium, I think was the first, like, hey, we could use this for communication, but it's just not going to get there. Well, along comes Starlink, through which I'm speaking to you actually right now. And they have this ambitious plan for low Earth orbit satellites that are so effective that the Ukrainians used them immediately in their drone attacks on the Russian Navy. And that thrust that company, SpaceX, into the debate about how involved should private industry be in war, and should policymakers be, how do we manage that kind of thing? And I think that's the way of the future.
And this is all sort of talking about like what your book is about, but when you do mix these things together, you need corporate partners who are willing to take on a risk, or be backed by the government to take on a risk, or whatever it is. And space, again, all these frontiers of knowledge. Here we are desperate to like reduce carbon footprint, but we're like, if there a kind of metal in the ground here that we can use, let's get the shovels out and start like just chewing up the earth to get to this metal.
In Shadow State, I thought, because I came from private industry, I sought to highlight our dependence on refined rare earth minerals that come from China.
Yeah.
And when you dig into this, you will quickly find out that pretty much 90% of them come from China. And some of the specialized magnets, for instance, it's like 100%. And so the F-35 fighter for a while had Chinese magnets in it, and which caused a huge kerfuffle, but you couldn't get them anywhere else. And so when this story opens, the president is working on a secret defense initiative that requires some of these specialized magnets, and he can't get them from China. There's only one other place he can get them, and that's Vietnam. And so then the story ends up being about Chinese subterfuge to infiltrate that via an industrial espionage effort.
Right. Yeah, and the book is called Shadow State. It's right here, and the link is right down below. And it's really awesome. I've really been enjoying reading it. Sometimes because I'm not the people in this book, but so I've done stuff like this, right? And so I can put myself in the story, and it becomes, in a great way, like hard to read fast, right? Like it's not a page turner, because I gotta think about, like, I'm reading it like a mechanic. So I'm reading what your work is, and then I'm thinking about how I would apply myself if I was Jack Ryan Jr. or if I was Clark or any of these characters. And I'm like, yeah, like this is great. It resonates with me, but I really get a chance to almost kind of internalize and make my own movie in my head as to how this looks and feels. And so I'm telling you guys, as someone who's a field person, this book's awesome.
Thank you, Pete, for that. I really wanted to put the techno back in techno thriller a bit, and make sure that I wanted to write an adventure story where there's plenty of cracked heads and bullets and guns and all of that stuff, which is always fun to do and is entertaining. But I think the Tom Clancy brand means that it needs to be about national security, that there needs to be something important at stake, and that readers can hopefully learn something about a critical defense issue.
One of the things that we look at, and this is a real life problem, and it's something that you guys, your authors, you get to play with, is the discovery and the compromising of things that are pre-classification. You go to a university, you work at Stanford, they're studying rare earth metal magnets or whatever it's going to be. And so you have agents in there trying to infiltrate these things. And it's a fascinating, like, how do you even chase that, right? Because you need that person's intelligence in their head, to work on this project because they're a doctoral student or they're a postdoc or whatever. But they're also the person compromising the very thing that you're trying to protect.
Well, one of the things that I discovered and actually researched for a previous book is when you start reading about Chinese intelligence and philosophy, they have a different mindset. They believe that, look, if it's out there, it's fair game, and to a certain extent, you can see why they would think that, but that means that they can try to infiltrate however they want. The FBI director, Christopher Wray, he came out and said, I forget what the statistic was, but it was staggering. It was like, hey, we're opening 1,000 investigations a week into Chinese industrial espionage. So much so that he was out with private industry, saying, hey, come to us, when you need help, let us chase this down. And in that respect, I fear that we're ill-equipped for the effort, and that's something else I wanted to highlight in the book.
Yeah, and well, I don't want to ruin the book at all. You guys really should get it, but the Jack Ryan Jr. character really is a unicorn, and someone you need in an alternate world, because to find someone who has all of these things, I don't know that person could even exist, right? And so you're already it's like a superhero movie in a lot of ways, because he's such a brilliant guy, and yet the story works, and it's so interesting. How many people does it take to actually do like what the things that Jack Ryan Jr. does in a real life thing? I mean, it must be dozens of people to do all of these things individually that he's great at.
Well, in this story, so keep in mind that what Tom Clancy originally set up, and I'm just carrying on this tradition, is an organization called the Campus, and the Campus is used for sort of off the books black programs. And so it doesn't really have a budget line, and it's used when the president needs such incredible discretion that nobody can know about it. And so it's really self-funded through a private equity company called Hendley Associates. And Jerry Hendley is this ex-senator who's super connected and is a patriot and so on and so forth. And so Jack Jr. is carrying on in his father's tradition, who was a financial analyst himself. But he is basically a risk analyst. And so when this story opens, he's completing a deal. And it happens to be for a rare earth mine in Vietnam. But that's really because Hendley Associates thinks it's going to be highly profitable because the industry is going to need to diversify away from China, which is true, by the way. Yeah. And so the part about him being a risk analyst and leading a deal to acquire a company, I don't think that's there are people that do that. I don't think he needs he might have a bigger team of junior people doing some of the number crunching, but that's largely him. I think what differentiates him is that he's not afraid to. He actually chafes at the idea of being only that, and wants to get out there and throw his fists around and take care of the problem quickly before it gets bigger.
Yeah. And I'm not being critical. I'm just, I'm talking about like the structure of a story, because look, to set up an SDR and all these other things. Like these
Oh,
things all take time. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
does this guy ever get to sleep?
yeah. Well, but that's that was something though I do try to capture, which is, yeah, he's been trained to do these things and trained in kind of a smaller, slightly unorthodox way, personally, right, by John Clark and Dane Chavez. But just because he has the training doesn't mean that he can do everything magically when he's in a foreign country and is all of a sudden being chased around. So yeah, he does his best, but it's not always going to work, and it doesn't work because he doesn't have a huge team supporting him. But because he's creative and resourceful, he gets through it.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the things too, and this is just real life informing, fiction, but you don't know who you're going to meet. Like you're on a ferry and someone makes eye contact. Maybe you do want to make contact with them. Maybe you don't.
Yeah.
You have all these people that there's many times in my career where by my just being myself, nice, meeting people, 2 months later, I'm like, oh, that's the person I needed to talk to. I just didn't have that need then, but now I can go to them and say, hey, we met a couple of months back. And it's the softest approach ever because I was a nice guy. So that really is how the intel works. From my point of view, from what I did, that is how the intel world works, is you meet people and you start building a network and then you maintain the network. And sometimes something just dumb luck happens. And you're like, dumb luck was built in hard work and not being home, just out and doing things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Jack, I wanted to keep this book consistent with the prior books in the series because it's a series.
Right.
And he had successfully recruited agents before with his now fiance, Liz Ann. And so and that happened in Korea. And so when he is in Hong Kong and gets basically a brush pass, he's like, wait a minute, that sure didn't seem accidental. And I know I'm not here officially on a black side campus mission, but hey, somebody reached out to me. This might be important. And that's his initial dilemma.
Yeah. It's and then the question always comes in. This is Pete, the counterintelligence agent, talking. Who's running who? You just never know, and that's the game, right?
Yeah, that's the game, and that's what always makes for. I think all compelling fiction has a mystery element to it. If you know what was going to happen and why it was all happening, it would be more like journalism than fiction. And so I think the who's running who is always a fun game to play in books that have an espionage element.
How much of a command do you have to have of the Jack Ryan et al. Universe?
Well, reasonable. I mean, I pretty good, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would say that what I did was I reread select Tom Clancy original novels, like where the campus really applied. The older ones are still fresh in my mind. I really didn't need to reread them, but like one was Dead or Alive, for example, and I think that was one of the first ones where I saw Jack Jr. getting involved in violence, and I saw there in that book there was also a recruitment of a guy who was an Army Ranger that they brought into the campus. So I picked up a number of those. Then I read the more current ones by Mike Madden and Don Bentley. And I don't know Mike Madden, but I do know Don fairly well. And Don and I met, and we talked and all those kinds of things. And we also collaborate with our editor, who there is that continuity over all these books. Mm-hmm. It's been the same editor, and so he provides really good coaching. And then one last thing I'll say is, it's quite amazing how there's Tom Clancy universe or the Ryan verse out there on the web, where you can just go, hey, you know what did Dan Murray do before he was the Attorney General? Somebody's written it down and they've cited it, and so anytime something like that comes up, you can go back and find it.
Yeah, I had Mark Cameron on, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or so, and Mark is also And he said, he's like, I call so-and-so because they were writing, and you guys do sort of work together, and it's a neat thing. And then I always wonder about this, like, let's say you read Debt of Honor, right? Like I read that, I think I read that when I was taking my,
Is that the one where John Clark is the hero?
I think that's the one when everybody dies and Jack Ryan's like, "Am I president?"
Oh, that one. Yeah, the Japanese plane hits the
Yeah. That's one. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And so, do you feel comfortable reaching back to there and say, "Oh, I need an Asian guy. Why don't I go into debt of honor and pull someone up who, you know, oh, I was at the conference, whatever, right?" Do you feel comfortable doing that, or do you not even need to do that? Do you have to tie things in like that?
I think it's more, I wouldn't say that it's like, hey, let me go back and grab that same villain per se. Although there is, funny you mentioned it, for this third one I'm working on. I have been thinking about that.
Good.
I would term it more as a matter of continuity. You can't have a guy not know something when a reader can say, well, yeah, he would know that. It happened 17 books ago, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
and my editor is pretty good about because he's been there throughout this. He'll know when you're getting too far out there. But fortunately, it's fairly easy to go look that stuff up. So when you sense that, hey, wait a minute, has he been trained on this? What kind of weapon does he use? That kind of stuff. You can find it really quickly. And for sure, it's super important to me to get that right.
Yeah. There's so much to get right to. And again, this is like where the book comes in, and it's super impressive. Let me grab this book and put it up here. This is it right here. It's called Shadow State. It's a Tom Clancy novel written by our man, MP Woodward, and it's fantastic. I love it. When you when you're actually, I have another question. No, I'm going to stick with that question. Okay, so there's so many things to talk about. I get excited about Clancy. Look, I've been reading it my whole life, right? I mean,
yeah.
Since the mid 80s, when I was, 15 or whatever, I started reading these books. And then while I was a counterintelligence agent, Tom was releasing books. And so it is a kick. And I really have lost my question. I guess the thing I want to ask you about, when you set all this up and you get everybody in motion and you got Clark doing things, I noticed that Clark is sort of looking at Jack Ryan Jr., like a mentor. And there's another guy, and I don't want to spoil the story. There's another guy too that he's like going to take a bet on, and he's not sure. Not necessarily that he can't handle it, but there's a lot of luggage that comes with this person. And so when you look at someone like Clark and the decisions that he makes, it's easy to have him jump off every bridge because that's the kind of guy he's been. But that doesn't necessarily do service to the story that you're telling. How do you manage the Clark character?
Look, thank you for that question, because it's something I put a lot of thought into, because Clark has evolved. First of all, he would be, in his 70s. He was in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So he's not a young man, and
he's
a tough man, and a very capable man. And not only that, but he is, his daughter married Ding Chavez, et cetera. Right. So he is, he has this close relationship with both the president and with Mary Pat Foley. So Mary Pat Foley becomes this important character as the director of national intelligence, because she's in and out of the Oval Office. And in many respects, she and John Clark are trying to protect the president from, knowing things that could end up being scandalous or, dangerous information, that kind of stuff. So then Clark becomes the execution arm in a way. He's a confidant to Mary Pat Foley, who knows all the threats. But then Clark is her black operations arm. But because he's an older man, he's running this organization called the Campus. So he's thinking about it as any leader would. Like, hey, is this guy ready for that kind of job? Who would I need to give him as a number two? Do I have the right kind of guy over here? Do I need to hire somebody else? What are the puts and takes of that? And what I wanted to do in this book was to create a new character. And I don't think this is a spoiler, but I created a new DevGru Navy SEAL Master Chief, who comes to Clark very damaged because he'd been sullied in the press as a war criminal. They pulled his trident, and he's really coming to Clark for redemption. And when Clark's got his concerns about the guy because his reputation's been dragged through the mud, but of course Clark has something of a soft spot, and more important, really needs him, right, for the operation that he has coming up. So he brings him on as almost as a provisional hire, but also with the mission to mentor some of the more junior operatives, because Clark recognizes that, hey man, you've done more than anybody else I have working for me. So I wanted to create that character as a Clark legacy and almost an extension of that senior SEAL mentality.
I got my question back. So when you write in the Clancy world, you need a lot of knowledge. Like you have knowledge about the military. I've got knowledge, but there's times when you're writing things and I'm like, this is just impressive. Like your ability to properly process in a way that I don't detect any bullshit. Like, oh, he really knows this stuff. So you must know more about how all of these systems work than you did when you were, a midshipman or whatever. I mean, it's impressive, man. Like all of the things you have to master to tell us a story. And everybody's waiting for you to put the wrong scope on the wrong rifle and all that kind
of yeah, that's true. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I have a good network of friends from military days, as well as that I've met since, who are real experts in this stuff. And you always kind of picture authors as going, okay, I'm going to fly out there and sit down with a tape recorder. And it's like, no, man, I'm just going to dash you a quick text, right? Like, hey, one weapon I saw this guy carrying in this news photo, I hadn't seen that before. Would this scope work in this kind of thing? What would the range of that be? Can these guys really talk like that on radio? So for the military stuff, I at least have a base knowledge of it, but then that's how I stay current. For the other stuff, the technology, I'm fortunate to have been in the technology field. Really, I came up through the wireless world and data communications. So I just happen to know a lot about that.
Yeah. But it is remarkable. And you are trying to be, I guess it kind of depends on the book, maybe, right? Like sometimes you want to be just in front of technology. We're like, hey, we've got Bluetooth that works out to 12 miles now. Nobody knows that. Whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And things that could happen in the future. And like my friend Kat Connor, she writes books and she's like, I'm just going to go ahead and predict COVID. And so she put out a book like 6 months before and like step by step, because that's what you all do is you all go, how does this work 2 years from now? Oh, it works like this. And we need rare earth. And then you put it all together.
Yeah. What I enjoy doing, by the way, is on that kind of stuff is taking technology that I know exists and then think, wouldn't it be neat if it could do this much more? And then you start to think about, well, how could it do that? And like, well, these are the way the waves work. These are the way the electrons connect. If you just tweaked it that much, and I'm making it easy because I'm just going to tweak it and do it, right? Whereas in the real world, that might just be gigantic, but it's not impossible is the point. It is sort of the next natural extension that I'm choosing to imagine and include in the story. Even though it may not exist today, it certainly could exist. And that's what you want, right? You never want sort of the magic box that can do anything, that a reader rolls his eyes and is out of the story. It has to sound like it could happen.
Yeah. And even when there's good news, Mary Pat, man, she's like, there's good news, but however,
right,
we don't know what we know. She's always.
But I mean, if you were the director of national intelligence, wouldn't you feel that way? Like
every briefing would be horrible.
Yeah, I mean, what's that? The old saying, I'll screw it up because we're on live, but the old saying about the intelligence community has to be right every time. The enemy only needs to be right once. And so I think Mary Pat is just beaten, battered by that. She's a seasoned pro, but she's sitting there going, hey man, there is so much going on in the world and I'm trying to catch all of it. So she's naturally going to be fairly skeptical.
Yeah. Well, and in their world, they've seen a jet hit the Capitol building. I mean, they've seen some crazy things,
Right. And in this book, she's putting it together that, hey, we're now in an era of great power competition where there's this axis between Russia, China, and Iran. And they do just enough not to look like they're, directly confronting us. And they're doing that through indirect actors like gangs. And that's what she detects. And she gives that a code name. And the campus is the perfect kind of organization to counteract that, because we have a hard time proving it, right? We can't go to Congress and say, hey, look what these bastards did. We need to put the Marines on the beach. It's like, no, we can't really prove it. We need a guy down there that will prove it and then take care of it. And that's really her point of view.
Yeah. What kind of a memo does Clark have to protect himself I mean, look, I know that he and Ryan have
Well,
deep ties.
if you go back and read, in Dead or Alive, as a matter of fact, he comes over from, I think it was Rainbow Six, from their European operations, and Jack Ryan, the president, has created pardons, and so they're basically pardon blank checks that say, hey, if you ever get into real trouble, you can't be prosecuted. Now, I don't think it's very useful to bring those up, because if you're reading that and you have a legal background, you're like, really, that's a
yeah.
But that was actually how the campus got started.
Right. I just want to back out and go back in time. When I was at Huachuca, this is 94, Sum of All Fears comes out.
Yeah.
In the movie form. And they name check Fort Huachuca. It's just some radar, boop, 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 but it sets the scene for what's happening. And you couldn't find a theater full of more stoked young troops than that. I mean,
wasn't that actually Clear and Present Danger?
Oh, that might have been. I might have said the wrong words. You're right.
Because I went and reread it, rewatched the movie with Harrison Ford, which rocked. That's probably my favorite Clancy movie. But yeah, you're right. And I went to the University of Arizona, so I'm very familiar with Fort Huachuca and this and all that stuff that happened there. And yeah, I bet they were like, God damn, man, we're in it.
Oh, it was so exciting. Yeah, they know because otherwise, like, no one else knows what Huachuca is, but here it is on the big screen. It was.
Well, I have a story. If I have time, I have a story a little bit like that, where the movie came into my life a long time ago. But I mean, I was still a lieutenant in the Navy, and I was at this training thing, and a lecturer came in, and he was a retired captain, I think, at that point. And everybody said, "Oh, he was in Hunt for Red October." You're like, "What are you talking about?" And so he prompted us to ask him, like, "Tell us about it. Tell us about the hunt." And this guy, his name was Reed Popovich, and he's the guy. Do you remember in the movie when that torpedo's in the water from the destroyer, or the destroyer's watching it, and there's this officer sitting at a scope going, 5,000 yards, 4,000, and then James Earl Jones leans over and presses the button. And it detonates, and he goes, "I was never here." So this guy was that guy sitting at the scope, reading that stuff off, and we were all like, "Well, how the heck did that happen?" And he goes, "Well, the producers came down. Frank Uriosi came down and wanted to know how does this stuff work? We're trying to build some authenticity here." And he explained it, and they just liked him. They liked his personality, so they put him in with the role.
Dang, that's awesome. By the way, we're discussing the book Shadow State. And he wrote it. It's under the Tom Clancy Jack Ryan Jr. novel series, and it's awesome. I really, look, you guys can probably tell that I love Tom Clancy. I love that it's a real renaissance. It's a golden era for military thrillers, whether it's techno or anything else. It's just so fancy. Andrews and Wilson, they wrote the sequel to Hunt for Red October, and it's just awesome. I love it. I love that we all get to do and go on these rides. It's fantastic. Do you have time to read the other stuff that's being written in the Clancy universe? That's
I try to. It's been a really, really big. I've had basically 3 books at once, kind of going for the last year, so I try to set aside time for professional reading, and that's both for research as well as to keep up with my peers. And I got an advanced copy of their book and made sure, hey, everything needs to match here. Same with Mark Cameron, right? I was like, hey, anything that happened here, that needs to carry through.
Right. And like your dream is to be a writer. Well, here you go.
Yeah, right. You're what you wish for. Right.
Yeah. Turns out it's a job. You have to manage it. How do you manage that? Like, how do you keep the fire burning at the right intensity? How do you maintain your day-by-day schedule? How do you do all that?
Well, first of all, it's corny because it's a job, but I love it, and so it doesn't feel like a job.
Right.
And I'm fortunate to have passion for it. I'm an early riser. I get up excited to go and do it and work on it. I find that writing is a bit like a muscle, and you have to do it a lot. I've made the mistake previously of like, I'm going to take 2 months off, and that feels pretty good during the 2 months. But then when you come back, you're rusty, man.
Yeah.
So I like to work on this every day for 3 to 5 hours,
Okay.
and then get to a point. What I find, everybody told me this, like, oh no, then you need to step away, and I was like, yeah, I'm not sure I have the luxury of stepping away. But now I see what they mean. Like you take something up to a certain point, and you're like, man, I don't. And then you'll go to bed, and you'll get up the next day, and you'll go to the gym, and you'll be like, oh yeah, duh, got it, right? Happens to me all the time. So I've just come to sort of trust that instinct in that process.
Yeah. That trust in your own capability, that trust in that time off, because it's really not time off, right? It's like a replenishing, and you need to have that.
Yeah, for sure. And any writer knows that you basically have a deadline, right? And so if you've managed any big project before, you're going, all right, I got 6 months to do this. Then I do right to left planning and say, I want to be done with the book basically 3 weeks before it's due, and spend that final 3 weeks thinking about it, fine tuning any edits. But by then it's on its like third draft. You know it really, really well. And then strangely, I go into this little tiny depression. You're like, well, I don't have to work on it anymore. you're like, it makes no sense. All you wanted to do was get this done and off, and now here you are annoyed by it, right? You're like, yeah, I never happy. And then on to the next.
Yeah. And another friend of mine, Jim D. Felice, he's an iron ass. And so he just sits down and he is 14, 16 hours. Like he just locks in, and again, that's a muscle not everybody even has the ability to develop. And there are guys like that who just lock in and go and write and write and write. But then, there's other guys that it's like by appointment. I'm going to do 2 hours now. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to, there's a lot of ways to do this.
I've done it, but I find that locking in part tends to happen towards the end of the book when, or I would say the final 20%, because you hit this point of momentum where characters are coming together. You're in the third act. People have realigned. You yourself are sort of excited to get to this, to tell this story and get to this ending that you've envisioned.
I love it. And do you know what's going to happen at this point, or is it 90% resolved? Okay, yeah.
I always write with an outline. Not that it doesn't change along the way, but
sure.
I believe you have to have a framework. Let me say that differently. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, but I think you would go down a lot of blind alleys if you didn't.
Right. Yeah. No, that's fair. And the person that doesn't do that, they discover that by having an outline and saying, this thing doesn't service me, I'm going to go this direction. And they develop a similar tool. But yeah, I'm always fascinated by turning phrases. And so I'm wondering what you think about this. And maybe I asked you this last time, if I remember correctly, but what's worse, a twist of fate or a fated twist?
I think a fated twist is probably worse, because you're like, well, what fate are you giving me here, as though it's already fully mapped out? Whereas a twist of fate, there might be other things to come. I suppose it's a fairly fine distinction, but that's my emotional reaction to it.
And then, so I think about authors, right? And you're writing and you're 85% of the way there. And you're like, I'm going to throw in a twist. This is a fated twist. Like, you're going to throw one in there, and then all the characters kind of pause, and you're like, what are we going to do? So you're creating it.
That's funny. It's funny you say that, because I don't think I go, oh, twist here. It's more like, look, everybody has to have their own character arc. They're going to interact in a certain way. I always want the villain to get his, and in kind of an ironic way, and for it to be ironic, it has to be something that wasn't planned. And so, there needs to be this story that people call twists, but I never really think of them that way. They just sort of naturally arise in the outline, at least for me.
Yeah. And if a twist appears like when you're just about done and you're really in the home stretch, are you still going to stuff it in there and get it done, even if it's like really late in the game?
I think at that point it can be something that you think of that you didn't necessarily outline. Like, all right, this villain is really screwed. Maybe we turn him into our double agent because he has no choice. And then, isn't that hilarious? This guy who wanted to, do these things is really basically being blackmailed now and run by us, and right. That's the kind of thing I think that you can get to the end of a story and be like, yeah, actually that would be pretty cool. And is there any reason why it wouldn't work? And then you might say, well, there's this one thing, and then you can go back and maybe it's minor and you can change it. But I do find that things like that emerge quite a bit.
Yeah. When I think about a faded twist, I'm going to give you time to think of one because I want you to give me an example. So I'm trying to give you time here. But when I think about a faded twist, the best example I have is Apocalypto at the very end. All of this beauty and running around and tragedy that we see, it's all Mox Nix because here come the Spaniards.
There's the ship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're like, oh.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think of that as more of a denouement in a way, kind of just sort of a like, well, look, that was all well and good, but here's where it's headed. And I do think that is said long ago, and you wouldn't necessarily call it historical fiction because it's not a history you think about, but it is. Right. It's a people that were evolving, and so I think it's interesting to throw in that comment. In this, as the writer, in this genre, I think a similar comment would be like leaving breadcrumbs for the next thing that's going to happen in the series, or look, we may have solved this one, but this other big thing is, that kind of a feeling is, our work is not complete here. If it was, the series would end.
Yeah. How, and I don't want to put you in the spot, so don't talk about this if you don't want to, but how long do you stay with this side gig and write these Clancy novels? Because, at some point you want to do your own thing. You don't want to be as under pressure, whatever it's going to be, right? Like you want to do it for a finite amount of time. How long do you think you'll do it?
Oh, I think short answer is as long as they'll let me. I quite enjoy it. I do. It is exhausting and demanding. But I have found time to write a separate book for which I have a contract, and if that really got in the way, I might reconsider it. The challenge is, if anything, the pace. There's as soon as you're done with one, you pretty much need to get started on the next one. While that's the challenge, I will say that writing a book that I just completed, that was bigger, and I had to do a lot of world building and all the blocking and tackling. A lot of that is kind of done for you. You don't have to explain everything in a Clancy book. You might have to remind people, but I don't have to go into, well, how can there be this thing called the campus? There just is, right? And this problem emerged. Why these guys? Because Mary Beth Bully's there. You don't have to come up with a lot of new world building. You just have to come up with new adventures. And in that sense, I think it's a lot like screenwriting. If you took over for a TV show, people would say, well, look, these are the way these characters work. They just need a new scenario, or maybe we're going to involve some of the characters. So it's a different challenge, and I think it's making me a much sharper writer, because you realize that these are different talents to develop.
And then do you have license to, like, they say, hey, we want you to do another one. Do you have license to pitch and say, I want to do an in-betweenquel and I want to land it right here between these two novels? Can you do that? Or do you have to stick pretty much in the
A lot of people ask that question. I had that question too. Like, hey, do they come to you with these? And it's like, oh, no. They basically say, we need another book. And then I pitch my editor. I come up with, 1 to 3 scenarios and write them out in 3 or 4 pages, and discuss them with them, and we choose one. Well, that's the thing, that you get to have some license to do that, because it is a lot of work. But like you said, a lot of the work is done for you. And I suppose on the book selling side and everything else, not that it's easy, but you're pitching a book from an established franchise, and if they're like, let's write that thing, I would imagine that takes a little less work than the whole enchilada, having, I want to start a whole new world kind of thing. I think so. And look, I mean, it's a dream for me. I think it helps my stature with my other books, all of those things. But to that point, yeah, the Tom Clancy's a brand, and so it helps with distribution, physical books out into long tail bookstores. It helps immediately with search, and it gives you credibility as a writer. That people go, oh, well, if you did that, you're probably not that bad, right? So for all these things, I feel very blessed.
Do you think Tom Clancy's up there in heaven or hell or wherever the heck he is, and he's like, "Why was I working so hard? If all these guys are going to write for me, I should have just let everybody else do this."
No, I don't think so. Well, let's not put him in hell, first of all. But
okay, all right.
I think that most writers, one of the things that's a thrill for me to be published by Penguin Random House and G.P. Putnam and others is that. Well, you've put something out there. You've put your art out there in the world, and it's going to endure for future generations. If you're really talented, it becomes something that people long from now would actually want to read. And so I would think that he would be just thrilled that that he has left such a legacy, that he created characters that are so beloved and enduring.
He's one of the most, depending on how you want to measure it, one of the most successful authors of all time. Like, his characters have been made into a ton of movies and a bazillion books. Goodness gracious. And all these different series, video games. Come on. The list is. Well,
it happens. Certainly look at J.K. Rowling, right? Her success is, I think, even more than Tom Clancy, but they're certainly the same level.
I'm going to promote the book one more time here. So you can see Shadow State. It's a Tom Clancy book in the Jack Ryan Jr. universe, written by our man, M.P. Woodward. What's next for you? Well, I know you're working on something, because as soon as you stopped writing this, you already were writing something. You're probably almost done writing that thing, if not already done.
Yeah, I have a due date at the end of August for
there it is.
a separate book, not a Clancy. And I turned in a Clancy back. I had a due date for that back in June. Nice. And am now working on a third, or now I will turn to working on a third Clancy. So yeah, lots coming down the pike, lots to do.
When you go to a party and you meet someone, like, what do you do? What do you say?
I get pretty embarrassed. I changed the subject. My wife will say, well, he's a writer. He writes and then she'll often say he's currently doing the Tom Clancy book, just so that to kind of orient people. But a lot of times I just say I'm semi-retired.
Yeah. Semi-retired. I love it. It's a funny thing, because if you say, "Oh, I'm a writer," or "I'm an author," or something like that, it
sounds very pretentious to me, and that's why I get embarrassed.
Oh, I would say, like, because well, look what I do for a living. I would say, okay, but like, what does that mean? Like, how successful are you? Have you? And I hate to say, have you written anything I've read? But because you could be a pillar in your field, and nobody has the first clue who you are, but you're making a lot of money. You're writing whatever it is that you write, right? A technical manuals. Like, I used to write those. Now I have a company and I make $10 million a year, right? I'm an author, right? Like, whatever. Right. But it requires a lot of context to understand, what it means to be an authher. And but it is a cool job.
I think that's why I'm uncomfortable. I guess I could psychoanalyze myself. Like, why the hell be embarrassed by that? Because I'm not embarrassed by it, but I'm embarrassed by the sound bite. I would say I haven't mastered that. I think I'm too shy and self-effacing to do that. But hopefully one day I'll get there.
I don't want to make this at all about me, but I have a similar thing where they're like, "Oh, Pete, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I used to be a spy, but now I have a show, like a podcast kind of thing." And I always talk, I talk wider and wider. I kind of disappear. Because everybody's like, "Oh, you've got a podcast." I'm like, "Hey, look, I've been around for 10 years. I've got 2,000 episodes. I've really done well, And way up there on Podcast Mountain, my show's up there, but it still doesn't get up above the snow, like the tree line. Like, I'm just a regular dude." And all that turns into, like, well, who have you had on? You know, like do this all day, you know, but it's hard. So I appreciate you answering that question, because it is an interesting thing for anybody who's in this world, or if you're a author / screenwriter / actor / you know, because that's how you have to get around these days, is try to figure out how you can bring the next check in, because not everybody can just do one thing. That's a wonderful thing, but we're all driven to do other things. So is there something else in your quiver that you're like, man, I am so fortunate to be able to be an author, even though I'm embarrassed to talk about it sometimes, but I would really love to? What would that thing be?
Oh, well, I have some other business interests that I pursue on the side, so that, you know, those are good. But to be perfectly honest, this is my passion. I mean, this is what I want to do. Yeah, I want to be good at it, you know. And
shit, man, done. Quit working so hard. You're good.
Thank you. I think that you know, that this is one of the reasons that I really pursued this when I was presented with the opportunity and left the corporate world. Fortunately, I was in a position to be able to do that. But also because I thought, well, you can't get better at it really unless you're super focused on it. And I hope that's the case. I'm certainly doing everything I can think of to get better and better all the time.
Well, every time I read one of your books, and even though I have all these books in my house and I get sent books, it's hard to get through all of them. I always get through yours, and that to me is like a sign of something that I really enjoy reading.
That's a huge compliment. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, because everybody can send books, but you just like start reading it, and you're like, I just get, and not even because of the book, but just because of life and my brain. But to be able to lock in and read, man, it's really a treat for me. So I thank you for that, for giving me that, and also just all the context that washes through me, because I am familiar with this kind of world.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad. Look, man, that's the thing, is that I like writing these stories. I like living it, and I think that's why I get a little sad when they're done, because it's the same thing. You know, hopefully you're feeling as a reader, like, you know, when you close a book you liked, you went, oh damn it, what am I going to do now? I mean, when you finish streaming a series that you've binged and you really liked, and you get to that 10th episode, you're like, oh, damn it, now what, right? You know, that's our world.
That is. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you hanging out with me. And by the way, this time, you may not remember this, last time my Wi-Fi was garbage. No drops.
Yeah.
It was so painful.
Nicely done.
we pushed through and we got it done. Anything you want to ask me? Anything else you want to say? Everybody knows about the book. Here it is. There's the link. You know what I always say, everybody, buy two and buddy read. This is the best plan ever. Okay. So anything you want to say or do or ask to wrap up?
No, I just, I like being on Break It Down. Congratulations on the success of the show. And it's been a super fun conversation. I really appreciate it.
All right, cool. I'm going to run these credits. I'll be right back to you. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.